few nights ago, I started listening to this old podcast conversation I was having. I was 99 pounds down at that time, and in fact, the very next day, I was 100 pounds down. Now, at that point, Tirzepatide was not in my story, and I actually didn't think that it ever would be. But I also still had over 100 pounds to lose. I actually said in that conversation, I'm going to lose the rest of this weight. It's inevitable. I thought I was going to feel nostalgic listening to this podcast conversation, but it was actually surreal because I realized that I wasn't listening to this woman becoming the woman I wanted to become. I realized that she was already there. She was the one carrying the conversation. Some of it made me laugh, like a very specific fear I had about what would happen to my body if I actually got as small as I wanted. Now I'll come back to that one because present day me can finally answer it. But mostly listening to her made me proud of her. So today in this video, I want to go back to that first 100 pounds lost. Remember, this is before Tirzepatide, and this is before everything else that happened that I explained in the other video. Listening to that conversation and looking back, I realized that it was never about what I ate. It was about learning to trust myself. To explain that, I have to look further back beyond that first 100 pounds lost, because for most of my life, I didn't think I just had extra weight. I thought being the fat girl was part of my identity, just who I was. I was 9 when I really started becoming aware of my body through other people's comments. Eventually, being the fat girl became something I almost learned to own. Owning it was a better armor than destroying myself trying to lose it. I spent years trying to lose weight, sometimes in ways that weren't healthy, and eventually I reached 360 pounds, and I knew something had to change. One of the biggest lessons I learned was that I was accepting an identity that didn't truly feel like me. I had just decided that this was who I was supposed to be, even though deep down in my soul, I knew it wasn't true. So really one of my very first mindset shifts was not, I need more discipline. It was actually separating my body size from my worth, from who I am. That first 100 pounds started coming off when I stopped asking, what's wrong with me? And started asking myself, what's really going on? One of the factors that drove my eating choices was that I grew up with food scarcity. So basically, when there was food, I was going to eat it and I was going to eat it all. So like one of the examples that I talked about in that conversation was pizza night. I always told myself, if I don't eat pizza with my family, then I'm not participating. I'm depriving myself in front of my children. I'm setting a bad example. When truly it was just pizza. One of the most surprising things I realized was generally I didn't want the pizza. Like I really just did not want the pizza. I wanted to participate with my family. There are so many reasons that we may want to eat, but it doesn't mean that we need to eat. And whenever I started asking myself that question, do I actually want this? More often the answer was no, and more often I was able to choose accepting, embracing, feeling whatever emotion that I was trying to avoid rather than soothe it with food. Then it happened. I stopped treating every eating decision as a food problem. Sometimes it was anxiety, sometimes it was habit, sometimes it was that old feeling of scarcity, sometimes I wanted to belong. I learned that food was not the problem. Food was just one of the solutions I was choosing to treat a problem. One of my most favorite examples to tell people about this shift was when I realized that I hadn't eaten for an entire day. And my husband was on his way home and he said, hey, do you want me to just bring home dinner tonight? And I actually already had stuff planned for the boys, but I didn't have anything planned for the two of us. And I really wanted him to bring home the food. And I stopped and I asked myself, what's really going on? And I had so much anxiety built up from my work day and I didn't know how I was going to address it. And it's almost like I just didn't want to deal with it at all. And so I decided food would be the best way to just leave it behind. And that wasn't true. So actually what Stuart and I did was we talked it through and he helped me come up with a solution. And I did eat, but I ate something that I already had ready to go for a choice. And I felt so amazing because it's like I took back my power. I decided the food wasn't going to help me solve anything. What was going to help me solve it was to talk to my husband or sit down and journal something out so I could get to a solution. Just there were so many other ways to take care of my issue. Food was completely off the table for the first time. I have to tell you that I really think that's the secret of losing that first 100 pounds. I don't think it was about my food choices or if I exercised or anything like that. I really believe the secret was learning to trust myself and giving myself the space to answer truthfully what was going on and what I actually needed. And what I actually needed was never food. And then here's the thing. Once I trusted myself around food, it stopped being just about food. It changed the way that I handled my marriage. It changed the way that I showed up every day for my kids. It changed the way that I presented myself at my job. It really changed everything. At 100 pounds lost, I barely allowed myself to feel proud. My brain immediately went to, yes, but look how much you still have left. I was treating pride like something I wasn't allowed to have yet. Eventually, that did start to change. I could stand in front of the mirror and appreciate what I'd already accomplished instead of only looking for what still needed to change. The thing is, if I had told myself that I couldn't be proud until I reached my goal weight, then I would have lost years not giving myself something that I desperately needed. I didn't lose 210 pounds and then become this woman. I was becoming her along the way. All right, so remember that fear I was talking about earlier? I was afraid of getting much smaller and becoming frail. I worried about what my body would be able to do. My son was around 32 pounds at the time. I specifically remember thinking about wanting to be able to pick him up as he grew. So I had to ask myself, why does getting smaller automatically mean that I'm going to be weaker? That actually helped me to challenge that fear. So at the time, I was strong enough to carry him then, so why wouldn't I be able to carry him, be strong enough to carry him at whatever weight I was at? My son weighs 45 pounds now, and I can still pick him up easily. When I reached 100 pounds down, I genuinely believed I was going to lose the next 100. I had built myself a tool chest and it was full of all these tools. I was learning to trust myself, and more, this was just becoming who I was. I had this really deep belief. I'm going to get there. And I did. Now, I absolutely had no idea what was to come next at that point. I didn't know that there was going to be some regain. I didn't know that I was going to go to my doctor and discuss what was going on. I want to make this really clear. Tirzepatide did not create the woman who lost that next 110 pounds. That woman was already there. That first 100 had already changed the way I felt about food, the way that I approached my life, and remember all these tools that I had built. Yes, Tirzepatide would become another one of those tools, but it was not a part of the foundation that I had originally built. So in that next video, I am going to tell you how I lost the rest of my weight and ultimately why I chose Tirzepatide as another tool to use. I keep coming back to something that woman said during the conversation. She kept saying, losing the rest of this weight is inevitable. It's going to happen. She didn't know how it was going to happen, but she knew that it would. And gosh, she was right.